BURT Lancaster, the legendary symbol of masculinity in classic Hollywood. But behind that glamorous facade, he carried a secret powerful enough to bring the entire film industry to its knees. A lifelong on-screen hero, hailed as the epitome of the American man, BURT lived with a truth he never dared to speak aloud. He once loved men. Not just one, but at least 5 famous men were part of his life. One made him fall to his knees begging. One betrayed him just before the Oscars. And one secretly recorded BURT's confession, using it as blackmail for nearly a decade. So who were those 5 names? And what did BURT Lancaster have to sacrifice to take that secret to his grave? Everything will be revealed in today's video. Born in 1913 into a poor family in the harsh Harlem neighborhood, BURT Lancaster grew up among dust-rumbling trains and dreams crushed by life. But instead of giving up, he ran away and joined a circus, where people had to live like soldiers and train like wild beasts just to survive. That extraordinary past forged his muscular physique, steely gaze, and an irreplaceable presence. And then destiny called his name. His debut leading role in The Killer's 1946 turned him into an overnight sensation. From the legendary beach kiss in From Here to Eternity to winning the Oscar. For Elmer Gantry, BURT repeatedly reached the peak of stardom. Standing over 6 feet tall with features carved like a statue, BURT was the very definition of the ideal American man on screen. But it was all just a role. Behind all the spotlight, BURT Lancaster was a man carrying a truth he never had the courage to reveal. A secret that could have destroyed his entire career if it had come to light at that time. A secret Hollywood always knew, but no one dared to speak aloud. 1. Cary Grant, the first love that ended in bitter betrayal. They were 2 of the most irresistibly charming men in Hollywood at the time. One was hailed as the most beautiful face in America. The other, the embodiment of strength and principle. But few knew that a secret romance once existed between BURT Lancaster and Cary Grant. A relationship fueled by passion kept in the shadows, and ultimately ended in a betrayal that shattered BURT for the rest of his life. According to a former housekeeper who worked at Grant's Santa Monica estate, BURT frequently spent the night there between 1948 and 1951. They would swim together under the stars in a secluded backyard pool, set bourbon under the moonlight, and even had matching small tattoos inked onto their ankles, a hidden bond no one had ever known about. But Hollywood was never a place where love like that could survive. In 1951, when Cary Grant began making headlines for his rumored romance with young actress Betsy Drake, who would later become his wife, BURT felt like he'd been stabbed in the back. A crew member from the film Jim Thorpe, All American, recalled how BURT smashed the phone in his dressing room upon seeing Cary's relationship with Betsy splashed across the newspapers. To make matters worse, Cary himself later refused to co-star with BURT in a major upcoming project, afraid that being too close on screen might spark suspicions. The pain wasn't just jealousy. It was the agony of being completely erased, as if their love had never existed at all. A handwritten letter never sent was found in BURT's home after his death. It contained just one haunting line. "You chose to lie to the world. I chose to die with the truth." His love for Cary Grant didn't end with a farewell, but with a silence that slowly killed him day by day. Yet even with a heart torn to pieces, he never quite learned how to stop loving. And then another man entered his life. Even more handsome, more famous. and infinitely more dangerous. A man for whom a single photo together could bury them both in a grave of lost reputations. 2. Rock Hudson, friend lover, and the fateful night in Rome. If Cary Grant was the first scar on Burt's heart, then Rock Hudson was the relationship that dragged him into a dangerous spiral, caught between emotion, temptation, and the terrifying fear of being exposed. Rock Hudson, standing at 6 feet 5 inches with flawless good looks, was the embodiment of the ideal American man in the 1950s. But behind that picture-perfect smile lay a lonely soul, forever forced to hide who he truly was. And BURT Lancaster, still bearing the wounds of being rejected by Cary Grant, seemed to see in Rock a reflection of himself. According to a cameraman's assistant on the set of The Leopard 1963, a film where BURT and Rock's schedules overlapped in Rome, the two stars would frequently vanish from the main hotel and stay instead in a secluded penthouse on the outskirts of the city. There they lived like two men detached from the world, no flashing cameras, no red carpets, no pretending. Just quiet dinners, soft French music, and a bed that had never welcomed a third person. One night, as told by a hotel staffer in an account never made public, BURT was found drunk, lying on the floor in tears beside a torn-up letter. Rock was gone without a word, without goodbye. Days later, Italian tabloids published photos of Hudson hand in hand with a local model, a staged romance meant to extinguish the swirling rumors that had started catching fire across Europe. BURT never spoke of Rome again. But according to a close friend, it was the only time he ever completely lost control on a film set, punching a mirror in his dressing room without uttering a single word. When someone asked what had happened, he simply replied, "Don't fall in love with someone who isn't brave enough to love you in daylight." No one could say for certain who BURT was referring to, but those who were near him that day all knew it was Rock Hudson. If BURT Lancaster had once experienced relationships full of passion and emotion, then his connection with J. Edgar Hoover existed at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, cold, calculated, and quietly intense. J. Edgar Hoover, the legendary director of the FBI, was also one of the most powerful men in America for nearly half a century. He could silence Hollywood, make presidents tread carefully, and held secret files capable of destroying anyone. No one would have imagined that BURT, a rebellious actor, a free-spirited artist, could have any kind of relationship with Hoover, the embodiment of order and control. And yet, that stark contrast was exactly where their strange connection began. BURT Lancaster met Hoover for the first time at a charity event in Washington, D.C., a gathering where the worlds of power and entertainment often intersected. Few could have guessed that a film star and a national security titan would share such an unusual bond. Hoover was plagued by lifelong rumors of being gay, yet he never acknowledged them. He was famously private, revealing nothing personal. His decades-long closeness with his aide Clyde Tolson was never officially confirmed, though it remained a subject of endless speculation. For BURT, the connection with Hoover was not a love affair. In the traditional sense, it was a silent understanding between two men, one yearning for freedom, the other imprisoned by his own power. They met a few times, private dinners, unrecorded phone calls, and lingering glances exchanged in rooms full of people. No one knows exactly what they shared, but BURT once said he was the most powerful man in America, and also the loneliest I ever met. His connection with J. Edgar Hoover was a completely different chapter, where affection was suffocated by power and emotion drowned in self-denial. But after all the pain and inner turmoil he had endured, BURT Lancaster found himself in love once more. It was a brief romance, yet it left a gentle, lasting imprint on his heart. And that person was Ricky Nelson. Ricky Nelson, The teen idol, the young singer who rose to fame through the hit television series The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. He had a face of innocence pure and fresh, always appearing before the public, with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to hold the entire sky of youth. They met in the early 1960s, when Ricky had just turned 20 and Burt was nearing 50. A generational gap that seemed insurmountable. And yet, there existed between them an invisible bond, a mutual longing to be understood, to be touched, to be trusted. At that time, Ricky was desperately trying to break free from the good boy image the media had cast upon him. He wanted to grow up to be true to himself, but didn't know how or where to begin. Burt, having been through every kind of inner conflict and emotional chaos, became his guide. He looked at me like I had all the answers. But the truth is, I was just trying to make sure he didn't get lost the way I once did. From a never-released letter by Lancaster. Their love wasn't the kind shared between equals. Burt was a teacher, a protector, but also the first person to make Ricky feel truly loved for who he really was. They shared only a few short months together, wrapped in the fragile peace of a secret relationship hidden away from the eyes of the world. Burt knew Ricky was still so young. He had his own journey ahead, and he didn't want love to become something that held Ricky back. So one day he quietly stepped away, not because he stopped loving him, but because he loved him enough to know when to let go. They didn't see each other much after that. But every time Ricky appeared on television singing about lost love, Burt would quietly turn on the TV, alone in the dark. After all the quiet, conflicted romances, BURT Lancaster found himself in a love affair that burned bright, a defining climax in his life, where love and desire collided under one name, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando wasn't like anyone Burt had ever met. He didn't try to be different, he was different. Wild, magnetic, and as dangerous as a storm no one could control. While Burt was disciplined and bound by structure, Brando shattered every rule not only in cinema, but in love itself. They met in the late 1950s at a private party for veteran producers and directors in Beverly Hills. Among the tuxedos, champagne glasses, and empty pleasantries, Burt's eyes found Brando standing alone. He wasn't smiling, wasn't pretending to blend in. He watched the room like a wild animal wrapped in a movie star's skin. I didn't know if I was looking at a man or a collision about to happen. But I knew from that moment I wouldn't be able to stay away from him. Burt, from a black notebook he kept hidden his entire life. When Burt approached, Brando smirked and said, "You're the guy I used to hate for being too proper. But I like you, because you never pretend to be anyone else." That night they talked until 3 a.m. Not about film, but about war, Freud, Sartre, existentialism, and even love as a form of political language. They didn't seduce each other with their bodies, but with their minds clashing ideas and sharing truths. Then in the car, after a long pause, Brando looked at Burt and said only, "Do whatever you want. But I won't belong to you." Burt said nothing. But in his mind, the fire had already ignited. They began to see each other in secret meeting, in seaside hotels, rented houses in northern Santa Barbara far from anyone's watchful eyes. No one knew who was chasing whom. Some nights, Brando would appear at Burt's door at 2 a.m. just to lie beside him in silence. There were weeks without contact. Then sudden reunions, like two planets pulled into each other's gravity. Neither of them ever backed down. They fought like two directors battling for vision, loved each other like two mad artists, and collided like two souls unwilling to belong to anyone. Brando called Burt a stone that could feel pain tough on the outside but deeply wounded within. Burt in turn called Brando a heartless flame blazing fierce, but always holding a void no one could touch. They would argue deep into the night sometimes until 3 a.m., only to drive together the next morning to the windswept shores of Big Sur. The egos too large, the wounds too deep, the secrets too heavy. They loved each other with the darkest corners of themselves, and that was precisely why it could never last. Brando began to change. He became erratic. There were days when he disappeared without a word, weeks spent drowning in liquor, times when he acted as if he'd never loved at all. He smiled at others right in front of Burt. And when confronted, Brando simply shrugged. "You knew who I was?" And even someone as strong as Burt began to crumble from within. He could make me feel like I was the only person in the universe, and then, in the next second, like I didn't exist at all. One night in April 1960, after a fierce argument in Burt's Los Angeles apartment, Brando walked out. They never lived together again after that. But they never truly left each other's hearts. Years later, when both were older, Brando sent Burt a postcard. It contained no words, just an image of an empty beach. And Burt understood. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't explaining. He was just reminding me of the place where we were once truly ourselves. No one can say for certain who Burt loved most deeply. But a part of his heart belonged to the romances that never made the headlines, yet lived on in the most secret corners of Hollywood's memory. Despite living a life filled with hidden secrets and love affairs, kept behind the curtains of fame, BURT Lancaster still got married. In the eyes of the public, he lived a normal life. He had a wife, children, a family. But like everything else in his life, marriage was its own private world of contradictions. Burt's first marriage was to June Ernst, a woman no stranger to the spotlight, though not the silver screen, but the circus. It was at the same traveling circus where Burt worked as a young man that they met amid daring tightrope rehearsals and the roaring applause of the crowd. They married while still very young, bonded by the grit of two people who had shared hardship, drifting from place to place, with no fixed stage to call home. But the harsh life under the big top, the weight of financial strain and growing differences in ambition, slowly fractured the relationship. Eventually, they separated, not with drama, not with scandal, but quietly, just as they had once come together. People still debate the year of their divorce, 1940, 1946. No one knows for sure, perhaps because even Burt preferred not to remember. Sometime later, Burt met Norma Anderson during World War II. When she was a clerical worker volunteering to perform for U.S. troops in Europe, filling in for an ailing artist in the USO tour. That chance meeting would blossom into a steady love that lasted over 2 decades. They married in 1946 and had 5 children together. Bill, James, Susan, Joanna, and Siegel, often called Sheila. Bill Lancaster would go on to become a screenwriter known for the Bad News Bears, while Joanna Lancaster pursued a career in film production. Norma wasn't just the woman behind the Hollywood star. She was a fierce social activist, deeply involved in the League of Women Voters, an educational organization focused on voter rights, and a committed supporter of the American Civil Rights Movement. Together, she and Burt organized a fundraising event for Martin Luther King Jr., ahead of the historic 1963 March on Washington. Their home in Bexar, California, even had a dedicated room for printing social justice materials, where Norma tirelessly printed flyers promoting voting rights and racial equality. However, Burt's demanding film career, constant travel, the glare of fame and emotional wounds he never shared, all slowly unraveled the foundation of their marriage. They separated in 1966, and finalized their divorce in 1969. Not long after his split from Norma, Burt plunged into a fiery, passionate, and volatile relationship with Jackie Bone, a hairdresser on the set of The Professionals. Jackie was unlike any woman he'd known before, young, rebellious, fiercely independent, and completely unfazed by Burt's celebrity status. Their relationship exploded like fireworks. Intense, dazzling, but just as easily turned into chaos. One of the most infamous incidents occurred at an upscale party where Jackie smashed a wine bottle over Burt's head in front of guests, including director Sidney Pollack and actor Peter Falk. In the end, it was a fundamental difference in beliefs that brought everything to a close. Jackie went through a deep spiritual conversion, while Burt, rooted in his free spirit and strong personal convictions, couldn't walk that path with her. They parted in bitterness, with no promises, no goodbyes. After all the turmoil, the woman who stood by BURT Lancaster until the very end was someone simple and private, Susan Martin, not a well-known figure in the arts world. Susan was the only one of his partners who stayed with him through the most difficult years of old age. They married in 1990 when Burt was already past 75. Susan didn't come to him for fame, but for the quiet man behind the spotlight. She cared for him during his battles with heart disease, was always at his side during hospital stays, and gently reminded him, "You've lived like fire. Now let me be your shelter." They lived quietly away from cameras. No scandals, no headlines. Just two people, their memories, and the slow-motion reels playing in their minds. Behind his legendary roles, behind the image of the rugged, magnetic man, Burt Lancaster was also a silent warrior. Off-screen, a man unafraid to speak out when justice was under threat, when silence became complicity. In the 1960s, as America roiled with racial tensions, when the name Martin Luther King Jr. was still considered divisive by some conservative media circles, Burt Lancaster stood by him. Without hesitation, without hiding, together with his then-wife Norma Anderson, Burt organized a fundraiser for Dr. King ahead of the historic 1963 March on Washington. It wasn't just an act of support. It was a statement Hollywood could no longer afford to stay silent on justice. He didn't stop there. Burt was an active member of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, where he participated in voter campaigns, political education initiatives, and spoke out against systemic racism in the American legal and social structure. Burt Lancaster didn't just fight for civil rights. He was also one of the first major film stars to openly support labor unions, artists, and workers in the film industry. When major studios exploited technical crews or pressured actors into lifetime contracts with unfair terms, Lancaster didn't stay silent just to protect his next leading role. He used his voice and status to demand transparency, fair wages, and respect for artists on equal footing with the industry's power brokers. He also fiercely criticized the conservative policies of Senator Joseph McCarthy during one of Hollywood's darkest eras, when artists were blacklisted and witch-hunted under suspicion of communist ties. While many stars remained quiet to safeguard their careers, Burt was among the few who dared to stand against the wave of fear. After all the legendary roles, the secret loves, the silent battles within one day, Burt Lancaster finally grew tired. And when he closed his eyes for the last time, Hollywood didn't just lose an actor, the world lost a symbol. In his final years, he lived quietly with Susan Martin, his last wife, the one who wanted nothing more than his presence each morning. Burt had already suffered 2 heart attacks. And then on October 20th, 1994, at the age of 80, in his modest apartment in Century City, Los Angeles, he passed away from a 3rd heart attack. There was no funeral, no crowd. In accordance with his wishes, his ashes were scattered beneath a large oak tree at Westwood Memorial Park, California. No grand tombstone, No bronze statue. Just a small plaque that read, BURT LANCASTER, 1913, 1994. But what he left behind isn't in ashes or stone. What BURT left is a legacy that lives on in every frame of film. He wasn't just an actor, he was a living statement for an era, a time when acting demanded truth, bravery, and the ability to reach deep into the human soul. He brought to life a kind of man who wasn't just physically strong, but emotionally complex, full of shadows, struggles, and an aching desire to be loved. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss more powerful stories about the stars who shaped our world.